Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Jim Kirchherr. Last November, Missouri voters approved a $5 cap limit on gifts to lawmakers to prevent lobbyists from spending a lot of money on politicians they're looking to influence. A KCUR analysis of data released this month by the Missouri Ethics Commission shows there's been a 94% decrease in spending from the 2018-2019 legislative session. Joining us to delve into how this new legislation is affecting lobbyist spending and other ways lobbyists still influence politicians is University of Missouri St. Louis political scientist Anita Manion, and joining us by phone is David Jackson. He is a lobbyist with Gamble and Schlemeier, Missouri's largest lobbying firm. Anita and David, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll have to admit, I follow politics, but lobbying is something of a mystery to me, as it probably is to a lot of people. We probably have some misconceptions about it, so I don't want to get too deep into what it is and isn't, but maybe that's what we should talk about. But let's talk, Anita, broadly. How has lobbying evolved over time? What are we talking about, what it has been, what it is today?
Sure. Lobbying, the right to address the government for our grievances, has been part of our country. It was founded in our First Amendment. But it has definitely evolved in the last several decades to be more and more lobbyists. And we're talking exponential growth of not only the lobbying sector, but the money that's involved. And that's really what this constitutional amendment was trying to address, the money that's involved in the lobbying practice.
How do you see it changing? We've said, this huge decrease, but I suspect money is still being used, and David, you can help us with this as well. What do you see the impact? We can't just simply look at the number, can we?
Yeah, I think that supporters of this reform bill would say, wow, look at the impact. This has really made a positive change on the influence of money in Missouri politics. But as I'm sure David will speak to, money, lobbyist gifts are, first of all, that's not the only way that money is funneled into politics. It's a very transparent way. Lobbyists have very stringent reporting requirements, but there's lots of way that money and influence still pervade in politics.
So, David Jackson, you're a lobbyist, and you probably get reactions to that when you tell people you're a lobbyist. But tell us what you do and what maybe some of the misconceptions are, perhaps the proper ideas of what you do.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot. I think it's a really important question. And, first off, I always like to point out, Gallup does a poll every year about the honest and testing the honesty and ethics of different job professions. And we joke that lobbyists and used car salesmen trade at the bottom of about 6 to 7% of people in their trust and ethics of that profession. But yet, probably 95% of people engage lobbyists one way or another, regardless if they realize that. Whether it be somebody that works for a company that has a lobbyist, or whether that individual belongs to, say, a teachers association if they're a teacher, or pays dues to the National Rifle Association or Planned Parenthood. There are a variety of different issues out there. And so, our main job is connecting people to their government and allowing them to have a voice in that. And so, our firm represents a variety of different large corporations ranging from, Walmart to Netflix to Ameren, but also do a lot of nonprofit work, for criminal justice ministries that works on criminal justice reform in St. Louis. We represent the Missouri Society of Anesthesiologists and healthcare. And so there are a lot of different angles and issues and industries. And I think it's important to allow people to have access, but the people have spoken. And I think that the constitutional amendment passed certainly addressed some of the concerns and valid issues that needed to be fixed in Jefferson City.
Yeah, what does it seems to me that it could be viewed as a rather simplistic solution. We'll put a $5 cap, and that to me is, you could buy me a beer, I guess. But let's talk a little bit about maybe what were some of the problems, Anita, in terms of not having a limit on what lobbyists could do.
To me, the biggest problem is the perception of the public that money is buying government and that money is buying influence, and that that because of this infiltration of money in politics, that corporations and moneyed interests have a voice that drowns out everyday people. And I think that that's the feeling that's pervading in the country right now. And Missouri in particular.
Well, money does buy influence, doesn't it? Or am I being...
So I think, I hear a lot of people equate lobbying with bribery. And I don't think that's fair, because I don't think it's a quid pro quo. The research doesn't bear out this evidence that I give you a donation and your roll call vote is what I want it to be. But what it does grant is access. And access, then you get the influence. So it allows people that access to build relationships, to provide the information that they think is important to lawmakers, and to help set the agenda.
David, you still get, when we say access, I'm not saying that in a negative term. You still have access. You don't have to buy you're not going to not get access because somebody doesn't get baseball tickets, whether that's what you were doing or not. So again, how does this work in terms of your access and the people you represent compared to, say, me as a voter?
Yeah, I think there was definitely some excessive spending and things that were going on that need to be addressed, and that's why people voted so strongly to support this. I think some of the unintended consequences you have through this are, for example, our business model has changed because we have previously, if a senator hosts, school kids from their district, we would sometimes chip in to help buy pizza for those kids coming in. Or if you have a legislator who really fights hard on an issue for children, you may have the school boards association that may give them a plaque, and now they can't do that because it may be valued at over $5. And I don't think that's necessarily what voters intended to do, but it's something we're still obviously going to follow the law. But I think it's a relationship business, as is any type of sales and any industry. But what it's required us to do as lobbyists this year, I would say that we were just as successful as a firm this year than we were last year, and so I don't think lobbyist gifts had any impact on our overall ability to advance our agenda on behalf of our clients. But what it does require is a lot stronger focus on boots on the ground and policy data-driven arguments. And it's not nearly as much of a relationship-driven atmosphere as I think it was prior to the constitutional change, but also term limits, I think, have had a big impact on that over time.
Yeah, and one of the issues, we can get into this a little bit, was the revolving door, legislators becoming lobbyists. And Anita, just respond to what David's been talking about here.
Yeah, I totally agree with what he said with some of the problems that were happening with the spending. And again, public perception. And so we actually had a rating in 2015 where Missouri got a D- from the Center for Public Integrity. And their headline was, "So little is against the law in Missouri." And at that time, there were no limits for the revolving door. So members of our state legislature could go straight into lobbying. Then we set a 6-month limit. So this constitutional amendment also added a 2-year limit for that. And it's not just Missouri that's
and some
doing
people
this.
kind of jumped ship before that.
Some people resigned right away,
Yeah.
so they weren't held to that account. That's right.
Well, I just as we're talking about this, I remember talking years ago to the late Senator Paul Simon, and I asked him about this, and he said, "Look, I get back to my hotel room, and I have a list of 20 people who called. Who do you think I'm going to call back first?" And it's the person who is the biggest donor, and that's the reality of this to some extent. But talk a little bit more about if lobbyists aren't spending lots of money on gifts and whatever plane tickets or play tickets or whatever, what are they spending money on, David? How does Anita, I'll ask you. It's not like they're not spending money anymore, right?
Sure. Yeah, and David would know more particulars of their day-to-day, but I suspect and what I hope is that they are hopefully spending that money on maybe more folks, more staff, having more contacts, providing that information rather than sort of that schmoozing, let's go to the Cardinals game, let's have some beers. Maybe it's in their offices, because a lot of the money that we saw spent in 2018 that now is gone in 2019 is travel and entertainment.
Yeah, David, I was asking about your budget. If it's not and whether you're talking about yourself or other lobbyists, if it's not for gifts in a sense of tickets or favors or whatever. How have you reworked your budget regarding the lobbying clients that you have?
So it's very limited what you can do with $5, and you're basically looking at coffee and a cheap donut. And so we have cut out all expenditures completely. I don't believe there were any lobbyist expenditures on behalf of our firm this year that I'm aware of. We are going to listen to the people and follow the law, and that's something we're very adamant about from our firm's perspective. Some of the things that we cut out, last year, or for the last, several decades, our firm has represented the Missouri Beverage Association, which is, stocked the beverages in the legislature.
The question, too, I want to get back a little bit to how maybe lobbying has changed in Missouri. First of all, this is a pretty tough limit, right? I mean, from a national standpoint, where does Missouri stand in regards to these limitations?
Yeah, so in 2015, before these were implemented, we were ranked 44th in the nation for our political financing because we basically had no restrictions or laws. So this is a huge jump to go from no restrictions to the $5 rule, which is very tight, coffee and a cheap donut. But one thing that I'm curious to see what happens is that if these donations are still being funneled in other ways through fundraisers and other ways to influence politicians that might not be as transparent as they were when they were reporting lobbying expenditures. So I can't take you to the Cardinals game and take you to dinner, but what I can do is host a fundraiser for you and help funnel money that way. So that's another possibility that it could just shift.
Yeah, again, I think sometimes people have this idea that that lobbyists are paying for votes, and that's what we've been talking about. But they often provide expertise, do they not? That the legislators, the state representative doesn't have a huge staff like a U.S. senator, right? So lobbyists are also involved in legislation.
That's exactly right. You have, I think, an important point here, too, is we also have new contribution limits in Missouri. And so you can only, contribute $2,600 to a state representative or state senator. And we also now have a ban on corporate contributions. And so it is true that sometimes legislators will use their campaign budget to help maybe stock, Coke and Pepsi in their refrigerator in their office, so constituents coming in can have, a cold drink when they come visit. But the reality is they can't use a whole lot of that budget for expenditures and, fancy steak dinners because they also have limited ability to raise money through those limits to help fund the reelection. And so I think there is some balance there. And anytime you have certain laws, there's certainly going to be loopholes. But I think for the most part, people have spend a lot more time in the Capitol focusing on policy and discussions and hearings. And, our days start early at 7:30 in the morning and morning hearings in the House and the Senate. And we're often there until, past 9 or 10 o'clock in Senate debate. And so you don't have a lot of the fancy steak dinners and entertainment. There's certainly no major league sports teams in Jefferson City, in the area there to take everyone's time away from business. And so I think that's one of the common misconceptions.
And I would say, too, with the providing information, with the term limits that are in our state legislature now, so not only is the staffing very sparse, but we have a lot more turnover. So the institutional knowledge that lobbyists can provide, I think, is increasingly important.
Anita, I think go ahead, David.
I think you're exactly right in that, our job a lot of time is connecting legislators to constituents in their area that may have a certain expertise. And so if you have somebody a state legislator who has a background in farming but really wants to do something for education, they're going to want to talk to people in that industry to make sure that they craft a law that does what they want it to do. And a lot of times that's what we're doing, connecting the people and the experts in the industry through that process. But we also have to remember, with term limits and massive turnover, a third of our legislature is new. We have the fourth largest legislature in the country, and these legislators are making $35,000 a year.
Okay, David, I'm going to wrap you up. We could continue this for quite a while, but I really want to thank you both. But we're running out of time here. University of Missouri St. Louis political scientist Anita Manion, thanks for coming, and lobbyist David Jackson, thanks for sharing your expertise. I appreciate it. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com. The Gateway brings you the day's news from the St. Louis region and across Missouri. It also includes stories from the Illinois side of the river and our Metro East reporter, Will Bauer.
In Alton, in Belleville, in East St. Louis, in Edwardsville, in Cahokia Heights, at Scott Air Force Base, I'm Will Bauer, St. Louis Public Radio.
Listen to reports from Will and all of our journalists weekdays on the Gateway, on the STLPR app, and wherever you get podcasts.